Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, and I'm your host, General Biography. Today, we're going to explore one of the most decisive naval battles of the ancient world, the Battle of Actium. This epic clash took place on September 2nd, 31 BCE, off the coast of Greece, and it would change the course of Roman history forever. The battle was a culmination of a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and power struggles that had been brewing for years, involving some of the most iconic figures of the ancient world. To understand the significance of Actium, we need to go back to the tumultuous period following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. The Roman Republic was plunged into a civil war, with various factions vying for power. One of the key players was Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most trusted generals who had allied himself with Cleopatra, the cunning and beautiful queen of Egypt. Together they formed a formidable partnership that would challenge the rising star of Octavian, later known as Augustus Caesar. As we navigate the intricate landscape of ancient Roman politics, it's essential to appreciate the personalities and motivations of these larger-than-life figures. Mark Antony, a seasoned warrior with a reputation for bravery and charisma, had been instrumental in Caesar's conquests. His alliance with Cleopatra, however, was not just a strategic move, it was also a deeply personal one. The two had formed a romantic bond, which would ultimately prove to be a double-edged sword. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, was a master diplomat and strategist in her own right. She had navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics with ease, forming alliances and manipulating events to secure Egypt's interests. Her relationship with Mark Antony was a calculated move to ensure Egypt's continued influence in the region. On the other hand, Octavian, who was only 18 years old at the time, was a rising star in Roman politics. He had inherited Caesar's legacy and was determined to consolidate his power and avenge his adoptive father's death. Octavian's strategic genius and cunning would ultimately prove to be the decisive factors in the conflict. As the conflict escalated, Octavian began to consolidate his power in Rome, while Mark Antony and Cleopatra were busy expanding their dominion in the east. The two sides engaged in a series of skirmishes and diplomatic maneuvers, each trying to outmaneuver the other. Meanwhile, the Roman Senate, which had initially supported Octavian, grew increasingly wary of his intentions and began to waver in its loyalty. In 32 BCE, the situation took a dramatic turn when Octavian, who had been gathering his forces in Greece, declared war on Cleopatra rather than Mark Antony. This clever move allowed him to portray the conflict as a war against a foreign enemy rather than a Roman civil war, which helped to galvanize support among the Roman people. Mark Antony, who had been preparing for a grand showdown with Octavian, was caught off guard by this unexpected declaration. Mark Antony's forces, bolstered by Cleopatra's wealth and military might, were formidable, but Octavian's strategic genius and superior naval power would ultimately prove decisive. The fate of the Roman Empire hung in the balance as these two titans of the ancient world prepared to collide in a battle that would determine the course of history. The summer of 31 BCE was marked by a series of tense confrontations between the two sides, with each trying to gain the upper hand through clever tactics and strategic positioning. Mark Antony's army, which included a significant contingent of Egyptian troops, was encamped near the city of Actium on the northwest coast of Greece. Octavian's forces, meanwhile, were gathered on the opposite side of the Ambracian Gulf, where they had established a strong naval presence. As the summer of 31 BCE wore on, the tension between Mark Antony's and Octavian's forces continued to build like a gathering storm, each side waiting for the other to make the first move. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of impending conflict. The two armies faced off across the Ambracian Gulf, their warships anchored in a state of uneasy calm, like predators poised to strike. Mark Antony, confident in his numerical superiority, was determined to crush Octavian's naval presence and secure control of the sea lanes, a vital artery that would give him the upper hand in the struggle for dominance. Mark Antony's fleet, an imposing armada of over 500 ships, including massive quinqueremes and smaller, more agile vessels, stretched across the horizon like a mighty serpent. The quinqueremes, with their 5 rows of oars, were the epitome of naval power, designed to intimidate and overwhelm any opponent. But Octavian's forces were not intimidated. They had been busy preparing for battle, using their superior knowledge of the local waters to their advantage. They had established a series of fortified positions along the coast, including a key stronghold on the island of Leucas, which controlled access to the Ambracian Gulf like a strategic gatekeeper. Octavian's naval commander, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, was a seasoned veteran with a deep understanding of naval warfare, forged in the crucible of countless battles. He had developed a clever strategy to counter Mark Antony's numerical superiority, one that would exploit the weaknesses of his opponent's fleet like a skilled surgeon. Agrippa knew that the key to victory lay not in brute force, but in flexibility and adaptability, the ability to respond quickly to changing circumstances on the battlefield. On September 2, 31 BCE, the day of the battle finally arrived, a day that would be etched into the annals of history like a scar. The two fleets clashed off the coast of Actium in a narrow strait between the mainland and the island of Leucas, a confined space that would amplify the chaos and destruction of war. Mark Antony's ships, with their towering superstructures and heavy armament, formed a dense line, intent on breaking through Octavian's defenses like a battering ram. But Agrippa had anticipated this move, and his fleet was deployed in a more flexible formation, with smaller groups of ships able to maneuver quickly and exploit any weaknesses in the enemy line. As the battle raged on, the sound of clashing steel, the scent of smoke and sweat, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. The sea itself seemed to tremble with the fury of the combatants, as if the gods themselves were joining the fray. Mark Antony's ships, despite their size and firepower, proved to be slow and unwieldy, making them vulnerable to attack by Octavian's smaller, more agile vessels. The Egyptian ships, which made up a significant portion of Mark Antony's fleet, were particularly ineffective, as they were not designed for combat in the open sea. They floundered like fish out of water, easy prey for Octavian's skilled sailors. One notable example of the decisive nature of this battle was the fate of the flagship of Mark Antony's fleet, a massive vessel with 8 rows of oars, a behemoth of the seas. This ship, meant to be the centerpiece of Mark Antony's naval power, proved to be a liability in the tight waters of the Ambracian Gulf. As the battle intensified, Octavian's ships targeted this flagship, showering it with missiles and boarding parties like a swarm of angry bees. Despite its size and armament, the ship was eventually overwhelmed, and it sank to the bottom of the Gulf, taking hundreds of Mark Antony's most experienced sailors with it. As the flagship of Mark Antony's fleet sank beneath the waves, the morale of his forces began to wane, like the ebbing tide that had once carried them towards victory. The Battle of Actium, which had begun with such promise for Mark Antony, was rapidly unraveling, thread by thread, as the superior tactics and training of Octavian's fleet, led by the brilliant Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, took their toll. The sound of splintering wood and the cries of the wounded filled the air, as Mark Antony's ships were unable to withstand the relentless onslaught of Octavian's sailors. As the day wore on, more and more of Mark Antony's vessels fell prey to Octavian's fleet until it became clear that the battle was lost. The once mighty Roman general, who had commanded such respect and admiration, now stood on the deck of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for a glimpse of hope in the midst of despair. But it was too late. The die had been cast, and the fate of Mark Antony's fleet was all but sealed. In the aftermath of the Battle of Actium, Mark Antony and his lover Cleopatra fled to Egypt, pursued by Octavian's victorious fleet. The Egyptian queen, determined to salvage what was left of her kingdom, rallied her forces and prepared to face the coming onslaught. But Mark Antony, his spirit broken by the defeat, seemed increasingly detached from reality, as if he had already accepted his fate. As Octavian's forces closed in, Mark Antony took his own life, rather than face the ignominy of capture and execution, a tragic end to a storied career that had once promised so much. The news of his death sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world, as if the very foundations of power had been shaken. Cleopatra, determined to avoid the same fate, attempted to negotiate with Octavian, but ultimately succumbed to the same despair as her lover, reportedly allowing a poisonous asp to deliver the fatal blow. As the historian Tacitus would later observe, the Battle of Actium was a turning point not only for Rome but for the world. The legacy of the Battle of Actium can still be seen today in the majestic architecture of Rome, the imperial system of government that endured for centuries, and the very concept of empire itself. The battle marked a shift in the balance of power as the Roman Empire expanded its borders, absorbing the territories of Egypt and beyond. The Battle of Actium stands as a powerful reminder of the importance of adaptability, cunning, and determination, qualities that have defined great leaders throughout history. Octavian's victory was not just a result of his military prowess, but also his ability to outmaneuver his opponent, to read the winds of change, and to seize the initiative. Today, the site of the Battle of Actium is a tranquil, almost serene location, with only the occasional ruin or artifact to remind us of the tumultuous events that unfolded there. And yet, as we gaze out upon this peaceful landscape, we cannot help but feel the weight of history and the enduring impact of this epic conflict on the world we live in today. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.